Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. I think we've got a great discussion planned today regarding COVID-19 and how manufacturers can prepare both themselves and their employees on returning to the workplace. My name is Jim Stratton. I work with the Purdue Technical Assistance Program, and I'm joined by two wonderful humans from the Purdue Manufacturing Extension Partnership, Kelly Weger and Joe McMurray. Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves?
All right, well, I'll start. This is Kelly Weger. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Purdue Manufacturing Extension Partnership. I've been with Purdue for about 7 years, and I work with companies throughout the state of Indiana, assisting them with their operations to focus on improving those in a variety of different ways.
And I'm Joe McMurray. I'm also with Purdue MEP and have been with Purdue MEP for 4 years now. I tend to focus on leadership training and consulting, as well as exports and what we call peer groups. And so happy to be part of this podcast and help manufacturers to ramp back up after this pandemic.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining. So I've got a handful of questions regarding the Return to Work and Recovery Guide document that's available through the Purdue MEP. For those who don't know, Purdue MEP is one small piece of a nationwide network of federally funded centers that are designed to help small and medium manufacturers. And as such, the MEP network has developed this manual, if you will, for the return to work process that we're going to digest a little bit today. So without further ado, why don't we hop into some questions and kind of from the employer's perspective on the return to work process. So Kelly, we've seen a number of support positions that have been allowed to work remotely. And as an employer, what point should I communicate to employees that we've taken the necessary precautions to make the workplace safe for when they actually return?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we're hearing quite a bit. I think it's important for those who have been working remotely. This has been a very jarring time for all of us, of course. And a lot of us, myself included, I've been working remotely for 2 months. So for anybody to be returning back to the office or the plant, they want to make sure that they're comfortable. And so it's important for you as an employer to be able to communicate properly, to reassure them that all of the protocols have been put in place. So you're going to need to do a few different things. First of all, developing those protocols, and we've got examples of those in the document that you referenced, making sure that you're able to get your hands on an adequate supply of PPE, making sure that you understand what you can and cannot handle internally within your company. And then most importantly, in getting all of your employees trained on the new procedures. We're creatures of habit, and it's going to be very common that folks are going to come back in and start resuming what they normally used to do. And we're going to have to be really, really clear to make sure that they know things have changed. So making sure that they're comfortable, that they know that you have sanitized and that you're prepared for them to come back to work safely are things that I would say are really critical.
Okay. And I guess one step beyond that, then how should we handle employees that exhibit symptoms? And what actions should we take if an employee tests positive?
Yeah, I get that question a lot too. It's something that for a lot of us is going to be a good likelihood that we're going to encounter this. And so it's really critical that we're prepared for that. So in the case that somebody starts exhibiting symptoms, the first thing you would want to do is isolate them. And if you've got the ability to give them a mask to cover their mouth and nose, if they're not already wearing one, that would be important as well. After that, then we would want to send them home immediately. If they need medical attention, of course, you would deal with that separately. But otherwise, if there's just a suspicion or some symptoms that are mild, we want to make sure that we isolate them and get them home. After that, we would want to then go back to their workspace and make sure that we properly disinfect their entire workspace. Then once we've done that, we want to understand who may have been exposed, just in case, we may or may not know at that point if it's COVID-19, but we do want to make sure that we don't waste that opportunity to identify those coworkers who might have been exposed right away and get a record of that so that if it turns out later on that somebody does test positive, we know who we need to go back and inform of the exposure confidentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. Joe, Kelly talked a little bit about the PPE in the first question I asked her. Should there be any additional PPE provided? And is that PPE same for all employees? Because obviously we don't want to make anybody test positive. And so prevention is the first step. Can you expand on the PPE a little?
Sure. So the PPE itself is going to be somewhat dependent, just like it is under normal circumstances, on the activities of the individual. We're recommending that all employees wear masks, and the higher level masks are obviously the ideal. Those are the N95s we tend to hear about a lot in the news media currently, or surgical masks. You can have also what's called a FFP1 mask. Those are really the masks ideally that you would want. Part of the potential concern there is their availability, although Purdue has done a good job of working with manufacturers throughout the state of Indiana, and we do now have a mechanism by which we can connect companies with PPE providers to get them those needed PPE requirements. Now, one of the things I would caution against is this cloth mask. We have a lot of people that are wearing cloth masks. Is any mask better than no mask? I think the answer is probably yes. But the reality is a cloth mask does not prevent viruses from getting through. So I think it's having the homemade masks are probably not something we would encourage the employers to do. We would encourage them to get certified masks for all their employees. And then certainly if they are an employee that is a first responder, for example, in the case of what Kelly just talked about, where you have a person that comes to work and they start feeling ill at work, they start developing a cough or start running a fever. People that are going to respond to those need that higher level N95 or surgical mask. It's really important that they have that. They would also need to have face shields. We're also recommending disposable gowns in those cases. Things like you might see in a clinic or any type of first responder environment where you'd see those heavier uses of the more extreme PPEs. I think also we need to have those higher level PPEs for employees that get broad exposure. So cafeteria workers, if you are having a cafeteria open, although again, we don't recommend that, and we can talk about that later. But right now, if you were to have cafeteria workers, or if you have employees that are designed or that are assigned to do the cleanup after breaks or lunch, even in those break rooms or lunch rooms, receptionists, security guards, shipping and receiving employees, anybody that's considered an employee with broad exposure to a lot of different people throughout the day, we would encourage the higher level PPE.
Okay. Well, you guys both touched on, some of the shortages of PPE. What resources exist to help folks find that, or to help employers find PPE?
We've got a number of resources that are out there. One of the unique pivots that Purdue MEP has taken during this crisis is we have set up a website, which is coronavirus.mep.purdue.edu. And we have been reaching out to manufacturers throughout Indiana. We've actually helped a number of manufacturers who were manufacturing other goods to switch gears and start manufacturing different types of PPE. We've been helping make those connections between small and large manufacturers and supply chain in order to get production up. So a lot of those resources are available on our website, and we're always happy to assist. If anybody wants to reach out to us, we can help. We've done that with a number of companies to get them what they need and sort of playing matchmaker a little bit. And I just wanted to mention, Jim, just to build on what Joe was saying about the masks. One thing that companies may not be aware of, somebody who's already using N95s is certainly going to be aware, but those that haven't previously utilized those masks, I learned during this process from our safety specialist, those in a work setting need to be tested and fitted by a third party for each individual who's wearing those masks.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a limitation And for some folks, there's a cost associated with that to do that testing. So I just want to make sure folks are aware that is one of the factors to consider when you're using those N95s.
Is that something MEP can help with as well, is locating those third-party resources?
We can, absolutely.
Excellent. Cool. So one of the other questions I had then was signage. One of the biggest things about this whole coronavirus pandemic is to make sure people are getting proper information. Do you guys recommend signage around the workplace that reinforces this? I would assume so, but if so, what types and where should that signage be located?
Yeah, I would absolutely encourage a lot of new signage. As we mentioned before, we're creatures of habit. And unless you have reminders on a regular basis, people are going to make mistakes and they're going to forget. So it's really, really important that we have signage, outside the building when people are coming and going to remind them. We're living in different times now, and so we do need to behave differently. If you have break areas, around the break areas, again, just reminding folks about sanitization and hand washing and 6-foot distancing. Restroom areas would be another location where you would absolutely want to have signage. Now, some of you may already have signage in your restrooms, but maybe it's not explicit enough. Maybe it doesn't say 20 seconds. So focusing on getting that out there and really throughout the plant would be definitely ideal, just to help folks remind themselves and others that we need to be behaving differently than maybe we did before.
And Jim, I think to follow up with what Kelly's saying, it's those of us that have worked in manufacturing and have had some experience with Lean and Six Sigma. One of the things that I would really encourage employers to look at is maybe even doing a what some people call spaghetti diagram, where you are really thinking through, and this is something where I think you could get your engineering department involved with, and that is really looking at the layout and design of traffic flow within your organization. How does traffic currently flow? How do employees enter a bathroom? How do they exit the bathroom? How do they move around? How do they enter the break room? How do they exit the break room? How do they enter the facility altogether versus exiting that facility? There are a lot of things that really we're encouraging the employers to look at to reduce things, for example, like touch points, leaving doors open where possible. I know some restrooms, obviously, you can't leave the door open, but if there's a restroom with 2 entrances, then maybe in the past you've allowed anybody to come in either entrance, redirecting that so one is an exit only and one is an entrance only. Again, trying to keep that 6-foot separation and keep the flow of people in this new time to be able to more easily sustain that 6 feet of separation protocol.
Yeah, no, that's a great recommendation as well. So let's shift a little bit to the employee's perspective. If my employer has communicated that they've disinfected the workplace, are there any additional precautions that I can personally take? I mean, you guys have really digged into PPE, but what else can I be doing for myself?
Yeah, a lot of it we've heard, right? A lot of it we have already been listening to. So practicing good hygiene, making sure you're washing your hands frequently, covering your coughs. I think the one that's maybe a little harder for folks is the social distancing. And that's something that when you look at the state of Indiana's governor's plan, all the way through stage 4, that is currently in the plan as something that manufacturing companies should be doing. So that extends through July 3rd right now. So social distancing means if at all possible, we want to make sure that folks are able to be 6 feet apart. Now, it may not be possible in all instances, but it's something that as an individual, you can pay attention. If somebody's coming out the door, just stand to the side and wait for them to exit before you go in, or, whatever the case may be. Some of the other things that are more behavioral that we can control ourselves, making sure that we avoid gathering in groups, things that used to be normal for us, carpooling is something that you can not do. not shaking hands, of course, and not maybe gathering in the parking lot or having, a smoke break with your friends. We want to do all that kind of stuff socially distanced. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. And then the other thing is when we get into work, you'll start to notice just how many objects you touch throughout the day. So we want to really avoid touching surfaces with our hands. And if at all possible, avoid sharing tools. So we might have to kind of think through what that looks like with our workstation. Is that possible? If not, what else can you do? So do you have the ability to, if you have access to hand sanitizer, maybe you do that. Or if you have access to gloves, maybe you do that when you have to touch something that you have to share and you don't have another way to disinfect that.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the social distancing because that's another question I have here. Anybody who's spent any time in a manufacturing facility knows that social distancing is not always possible, sometimes impossible. What should I expect my employer to do if social distancing is not an option?
So, Jim, going back to the PPE that we talked about earlier,
Yep.
There are a variety of different things that employers are doing currently, and we encourage this. We've seen a lot of press as of late about meat processing facilities that are having a terrible time with regard to there being high instances. They are becoming or have become hotspots for the coronavirus. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is virtually impossible for them to maintain that 6 feet of distance. And in those places, oftentimes the employees are literally standing shoulder to shoulder or within a few inches of each other as they're working. And so other things that can be done by organizations is things like creating barriers between those people, whether they be plexiglass or whether they be some sort of other hard barrier. Now, those will need to be cleaned, just like any other tools or surfaces. Those will need to be cleaned regularly, but that is one way to help reduce that. I think another thing that I'd like to bring up is Kelly talked about employee training. I think it's incumbent upon employers to really focus on training the employees and creating a culture of safety. Most companies do already try very hard to create a culture of safety, but we need to include this coronavirus as part of that culture of safety training. And that means that we should be willing to and not be in trouble for example, saying to a colleague or saying even to a supervisor or manager, hey, with all respect, I'd like to keep a distance. I think it's okay to say that. I think another thing that I find intriguing, and I'm not recommending it, and that is this elbow bump. When visitors or employees come back and they start to see each other, our natural inclination is to shake hands or to hug. We've been encouraged to do an elbow bump. The reality is you have to get closer than 6 feet to do an elbow bump. So coming away from that and saying, look, we just need to nod at each other and or do a subtle bow. I know some people don't like the idea of a bow, but I think some acknowledgement without having any physical contact is really recommended.
That's a great point. I never thought about the elbow bumping within a 6 foot, social distance rule. So you guys mentioned the cafeterias being closed and smoke breaks, which brings up a really good point about, lunch breaks, smoke breaks, any breaks during work, and the social aspect of returning to work. How can you still do this safely, and what changes should we expect during break time?
Yeah, that's a great question. Being apart from our work colleagues for an extended period of time, may not be something that we were anticipating missing so much. But when we head back to work, we have a lot of work family that it's exciting to get to see again. So it's going to be a little bit challenging. We do need to still be safe. So as we get back to work, we are going to have to shift our routine a little bit. A lot of places are recommending bringing your own lunch and having cafeterias closed. Obviously, still maintaining that 6 foot distancing if you're in the break room together. making sure that you're washing your hands, disinfecting surfaces. So, I mean, it's still possible to socialize and enjoy your breaks with your work buddies, but we do need to take it carefully. And it may also be a little bit of a challenge. You know, we often talk about how we're feeling with people that we work with and use them as kind of a sounding board. So we want to catch up with them. And, you know, that's an important part of our mental health as well as our physical health. And I know Joe teaches a lot of classes on things like, stress relief and emotional intelligence. So he's probably got even more insights into that.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. I do think that what Kelly's saying is, and we've actually been able to prove this out. There's quite a bit of research out there ongoing that shows that the mental health community is actually seeing quite a bit of spike in mental health issues centered around this pandemic. And a lot of that is not only anxiety about the virus itself, but also just the isolation from other social network beyond just the immediate family. And so I do think it is important to remember and to be empathetic with our employees. We need to make sure that we have mechanisms in place that allow them to be able to talk about the things that are concerning them. No different than what I said earlier about, hey, it should be okay for me to say to a coworker, hey, do you mind taking a step back? I want to maintain this social distancing. But also be able to and have a mechanism to talk about the things that are making us anxious or that are, just to commune together. And I think we do that a lot, right, at breaks and at lunch. And we just have to create that new environment, as Kelly said, that allows us to continue to do that, but at a safe distance. And one story real quickly that I think helps is, for example, a fellow told me that because you're wearing a mask, you can't see people's facial expression. And this individual had actually was talking to a group of people, all maintaining social distances, but he was talking about a happy event. So right before the event, he he cut out a big smiley face, a smiley mouth, and taped it to his mask. And so it didn't violate the integrity of the mask, but yet it showed people he was smiling really big. And so I think we could, and people just in general are creative. If we allow our employees to be creative without jeopardizing the integrity of the PPE, I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think we ought to encourage that. So, and another thing I'd like to point out coming from that is the employees need to be involved in some of these decisions. And what I mean by that is this: for employees to feel and buy into the things we're asking them to do, we need to allow them to have a feedback loop. Sure, we as employers need to outline the initial thing of what we're doing, but I think as we go, we're going to go through iterations. We're going to find things that we didn't expect. And I think getting employees' feedback and allowing them to participate in the development or the re-innovation of the processes and the way we're doing things is important to their mental health as well as important to the organization.
Absolutely. I think we're all going to grow with these changes as we learn more.
Agreed.
Hey, Joe, I just wanted to share that I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I happen to have a mask that I use when I have to go out to the store, and I drew a giant smiley face on it. And every time I go to the store, people that work there look at me and bust out laughing and say, "That's great." So I absolutely am a big fan of that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Fantastic.
Well, I think that wraps my questions. What can listeners do to get more information on the topic?
Well, anybody that is trying to kind of muddle through this, that wants more assistance, can absolutely go to our website. The entire return to work and recovery guide that we've been referencing is going to be available for free to manufacturers and employees. So if you go to our main website, which is the coronavirus.mep.purdue.edu, We have a lot of different links and resources there, and you can contact us to request the guide. When you do that, we will have somebody in our office give you a call back, and we'll email you the guide and walk through it and be able to answer questions directly for you. So as we're working through this, we're here for you, and we're happy to help however we can. And I just wanted to also mention, Joe had talked about a couple of things like the spaghetti diagram and some stuff like that. Those are services that we already offer. So we are continuing to offer a lot of those services. Currently, we're doing those virtually. But if you need assistance with anything, plant layout, if you need to try and understand some of the safety issues more in detail or more specific to your needs, please reach out to Purdue MEP and we'd be happy to help.
I'd also like to add that we are going to be rolling out webinars in the next week or two regarding specific sections. We're going to start out, I believe, with the entire guide itself. And then over time, we're going to dig into specific sections of the guide as employers start to get familiar with the guide and its availability. So that's another thing that we're going to be offering, Jim, for our clients or anyone that would care to participate in looking at this guide and understanding more about it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks,
Kelly.